Hello and welcome to a Friday, December 29th edition of the Managing Madrid Podcast. I'm your host, Kiyan Sobhani, joined by my friend, Matt Wiltse. Always a pleasure having you on. Hope the holidays are treating you guys really, really well. We got a special treat for you guys today. It's been a while. Matt and I had planned to just kind of weekly go through and finish Beckham episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4. It was a 4-week schedule, and we did episodes 1 and 2 in part only because I hadn't watched the last 2 episodes of the documentary, so it got delayed. But I did watch them a while ago. I took notes on it, and then Matt and I just couldn't record, and then Real just started playing again. The international break ended. There was 2 games a week. The news cycle was endless. Matt is a dad. I'm a dad. Life got in the way. So we put it off for a while. We put it off more than we needed to, but we're finally doing it today. Episodes 3 and 4, we're going to lump it together. We're just going to finish the damn thing. We're going to finish talking about it, put a bow tie on it, and seal it in the vault. But first, Matt, big news. Carlo Ancelotti got renewed today. Did you see it coming?
Yes. Just because we had some news surface out kind of early on that Madrid was trying to wrap up the deal before Christmas, look to get a renewal done before Christmas. And so now that it's official, I think it all kind of makes sense with what we heard earlier. I'm not going to rehash too much of what I've said before because obviously those who listen to the Big Picture podcast know Ruben and I went in kind of detail on Ancelotti, and then two, I just put out a big thread on Twitter of some of my thoughts as well, and I think basically what it boils down to though is I think the team now feels like it's going in the right direction, and it feels like the team's the sporting success and strategy so far has aligned with what the club has been trying to do in terms of their recruitment policy, and the transition to integrating some of these other players. I think it all feels like it's kind of rowing in one direction, hand in hand. The investments that the club have made have improved since working with Carlo Ancelotti. And so I think when you look at it from that perspective, this all makes a lot of sense. And we've talked about it ad nauseum, how he handles the media, he manages up, he gets the best out of the locker room. He's created this cohesion. Like there's so much, and I think he deserves it. At the end of the day, he deserves it, and I'm happy for Carlo, one of the best managers in our entire history. And it feels like, knock on wood, we're heading in the right direction, and let's keep the momentum going.
Yeah. It's funny to look back at the timeline of this season and revisit the discussion we were having in the summertime when the Brazil links came up. It seemed like to a lot of people that it was a foregone conclusion that Ancelotti, this was his last year at Real Madrid. It was the last campaign. Brazil had signed him. Like literally, this is what's being reported by very reputable people. And it wasn't official anywhere other than these reports almost making it seem official that it was just a foregone conclusion he was going to Brazil. And I remember uh I was kind of like, we still have to wait for this to like, why wouldn't Ancelotti renew, let's say, if he had a great season? Like, is it really official? And then there was that, again, to me, was one of the most underrated things that happened this season that no one seemed to care about except for me. And I kept bringing this up. I was like, remember, guys, why did Roberto Carlos, like, in preseason, after all the Brazil things were quote unquote done, why did he come out and say Ancelotti would never sign for Brazil? Like, when he has a contract for Real Madrid, that would be unprofessional. He would never do that. And then you kind of fast forward, and then the Brazilian federation was going through changes too as well. They're struggling, and Ancelotti, meanwhile, is doing an incredible job at Real Madrid, and we all just kind of like realize that this is not a foregone conclusion at all. And why wouldn't he actually just stay? Even amid the incredible year that Xabi Alonso was having at Bayer Leverkusen, how much fans want him, even despite that, uh, it actually there is a strong case for him to be renewed. I think some people are having trouble digesting the length of the contract. Maybe that part of it was a surprise. Maybe we expected more of a 1 or 2 year renewal. What were your thoughts on the length of the contract, which goes till 2026?
Yeah, I mean 2 years. I mean I think that's fine. I think
It's
like
literally,
a
yeah,
one
2 year
year
extension, right? Yeah.
yeah. So a 1 year renewal I feel like would be, I don't know. It does that as a coach, I don't know. It just it's a weird position to be in if you just did a 1 year renewal. I think a 2 year renewal is fine. You posted on Twitter, like you're not tied to the contract at the end of the day. Let's say Ancelotti goes into the fourth season. Maybe we win La Liga this year, and that's all we win. He goes into his fourth season, and things don't go well at the end of the season. You don't have to go with that fifth season. How many times have we seen a coach actually complete their contract at Real Madrid? But one thing that I'm trying to figure out, I did a quick search on it, but it may require a deeper dive, and maybe off the top of your head. But how I feel like it's pretty unprecedented for a Real Madrid coach to get a contract extension. Like, how often have we seen this happen? I can't remember. Like, I don't think Zidane, because I think Zidane left before each time he left before there was a contract extension involved. Obviously, Miguel Munoz. Did Del Bosque ever get a contract extension? Like, I'm trying to remember coaches that got an actual contract extension.
I'd have to look it up. I
I
don't know
think
off the
it's
top of my
really
head.
rare.
It's definitely rare. It's definitely rare. Um, don't you think? I mean, we'll kind of get into it when we talk about the Beckham documentary, actually. Things that would never happen now that happened back then at Real Madrid under Florentino Perez's leadership.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things, and like the Athletic came out and said part of the reason why they've done this now is they want the stability and continuity, and I think that's been a major thing. I think that's been an underrated theme of Florentino Perez's second reign is the stability and continuity. Like even player wise, like we used to cycle through players and like half the team in, half the team out in summers and stuff like that. Maybe not so much under Florentino's first reign because it was more just bringing in one Galactico per summer, but under Ramon Calderon, I remember like each summer was like a whole new team
Yeah.
during those two seasons.
Well, you
And
could go back to the '97 season. It was like half the team was
yeah,
just changed overnight. And
yeah. And so yeah, I think that's been a theme. And I don't know, maybe there's obviously, I feel like there's still, I don't know what percentage you would call it. I think most fans are happy with the renewal. And I think most fans recognize the great work that Ancelotti does and where he sits in Real Madrid history. I still think there's a subset, maybe 25-30%, that are really unhappy with this renewal. Don't think Ancelotti's the guy. We'll point out every little flaw. Um, and I don't know, I don't want to like categorize that but for me, sometimes I think maybe it's younger followers of Real Madrid because they seem to kind of lean towards wanting more of a systems coach and a tactical coach. And I think um, like when you've seen this club and the mess it can be and how well Ancelotti's done over his two tenures, like you recognize and appreciate kind of what he's done. Whereas I don't know, I could be going too
I,
far with this theory, but
no, I don't. I mean, look, I mean, it's sometimes we have to remember that half the people on Twitter are kids, like the
yeah,
ones behind the anonymous profiles. Most of them are kids. And so, like, when you're factoring that in and you're talking about like the people who have been around the club for a long time and have seen how it's operated and have seen, like, to me, and because you and I have been following, and I mean, there are obviously people much older than us, who have been, you and I go back to late '90s, early 2000s, but then you and I also have gone back through history and have learned the club, right? And we rewatch games, we read old articles, and we've tried to piece together as much information about the club as we can. And it's I I always look at the decisions the club has made, and a lot of the times, a lot of mistakes could have been avoided if you just kind of erred on the side of continuity. And sometimes I think we're too quick with the trigger. What I was going to say earlier was like the Ancelotti season he had last season, where he didn't win the league, and really was behind Barcelona in an embarrassing amount of points. That Barcelona team in particular, which was not impressive to me. And then you see the Champions League elimination, which I'm not as hard on as some other people are. I want to talk about that too. Do you think if that was like 10 years ago, Ancelotti would have been sacked after that season? I feel like they've changed a little bit the way they run
Yeah.
things in the
Yeah.
past few years.
Yeah. I actually do think he probably would have been sacked.
Yeah.
And I know some people like that ruthlessness and like that and feel that that's upholding the club standards. But I think it's not always so black and white, especially in
No.
terms of results. And there's
The
so much
problem with
gray in this.
ruthlessness, sorry, Matt, the problem with
Yeah.
ruthlessness is that it can be sometimes detrimental. Ruthlessness
Yeah.
is not
Doesn't always mean
it's
good
not a
things. Like,
ruthlessness is
yeah.
not a guarantee that you've made the
Yeah.
right decision, is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of gray space there and a lot of context within that season. And so I think that's what the club does differently now is, and what Florentino and Jose Angel Sanchez do differently is they view it with that context. They understand the history. They understand, and I think they've gone through Florentino and Jose Angel Sanchez have gone through so many coaches now, and like that they kind of know what they're looking for. Um, and I think they know that there's so many positives and positives that outweigh the negatives with Ancelotti that it's a relationship worth keeping. And I think the managing up piece, that portion of Ancelotti, like I think he does it so well. And I think people like he doesn't people say, oh, because he doesn't complain, he doesn't get new signings. Like we people almost prefer that it's like a Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte type profile who's very demanding and like can't stand like I don't agree with that. And I think Ancelotti shows it just gives him even more value the way he's adapted and just managed the season, managed the personnel, bended and shape shifted the system this year, especially. And he's always just so grateful and he's positive and he spins things in a positive direction rather than being negative. And I personally find that refreshing and just I'm sure the club do too. I'm sure Jose Angel and Florentino respect that and appreciate that.
I think he's improved a lot of aspects to his coaching. Sometimes we forget that coaches can improve and go in and out of form just like players do. Kind of
Yeah.
reminds me of he's like kind of the Modric of coaches. How many coaches his age are at this kind of level? I'd actually say zero right
Well,
now.
he surrounds himself too with a young staff. Like he's got a young modern staff. We did
Yeah,
those whole podcast episodes on the staff, and
yeah.
we know that Davide has a lot of responsibility, and all of the, I mean, his coaching staff are all, I think, in their 30s for the most part. Besides, obviously, Pintus and Lopez, the goalkeeper coach. So either late 30s, early 40s. So like these are young modern coaches that are implementing some new technology, new methods, things of that nature. And I think that's part of the reason why he's been able to kind of adapt and grow into this modern game.
I'm having trouble understanding anyone who's upset about the renewal because to me, it actually changes nothing. Like it doesn't change anything that you've renewed your coach for a couple extra years because we know it's not like having a coach under a longer term contract is not like having a player under a long-term contract. It's not an immovable contract. Real Madrid in the past have been more than comfortable with paying out a coach if they feel like it's not a right fit. The contracts mean very little if we're being really clear about this. Contracts with coaches can be broken at any time, and Real Madrid generally have been okay with paying them out or coming to some mutual agreement. And I think when people look at 2026 and say, okay, this is a long-term contract, we're tied to this coach, we're married to this coach, we're not. If the rest of the season turns out to be a disaster, which I doubt, I think if it goes to shits, I don't think it's because Ancelotti all of a sudden did a terrible job coaching. I think it'll probably go to shits. If it does, probably because of injuries are just going to get out of control, and we'll just get some bad bounces our ways. We'll have some bad performances, but it's not like Ancelotti's just going to go out and stop trying to coach. It's not similar to a player contract, like a player getting his contract and all of a sudden he doesn't care anymore. I don't think this is remotely even close to that kind of situation. Look, it's a vote of confidence midway through the season. Ewan brought a really good point up on Twitter. He said, this stops now all of the press conference questions and the uncertainty of like, so what are you going to do at the end of the season? Are you going to stay? Are you going to go to Brazil? Are you going to go there? Are you going to retire? This eliminates half of the bad press conference questions now. So now we only have to worry about Mbappe questions for the rest of the summer, for the rest of the season.
Yeah,
So
no, I agree. And I think I know a lot of people obviously feel strongly about Xabi Alonso, given how well he's done, and we've talked about him a lot. If you look at what Xabi has said over the years, and even in a recent Guardian interview, I have a strong hunch that he will still be at Bayer Leverkusen next season.
I think so too.
I do not think he plans to leave. And so with, let's say, Xabi off the table, like, what more are you looking for in a manager than Carlo Ancelotti right now? I honestly, there are very few things I can nitpick, especially reviewing the last 2.5 seasons. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say there.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think we need to go too deep into it because you and I have already talked about Ancelotti so much this season. Everything that we want to say about this renewal has already been said. So nothing really changes today with regards to our thoughts. But just to reiterate, and we've outlined many reasons why you and I have, you brought this up first, and I agreed with you that I think year 4 has the potential to be even better than year 3 for a variety of reasons, especially if you get another star in this, because we know Ancelotti and stars are a good combination to get free-flowing, dominant football.
And I also, one last thing, I also trust Ancelotti to do right by a guy like Endrick. And I'm not saying like start him week in and week out, but just integrate him into the squad and give him the right role and develop him. Like, I trust him now, given the track record that we've seen with Ancelotti.
Yeah. And I don't know whether Endrick will be the only signing or not, but I don't know if you saw just before we hit record, The Athletic has already put out a report saying we've made an offer for Mbappe.
Yep.
So it's not even January 1st yet, and it's already begun.
Expect
So
nothing less.
buckle up. A lot of podcast talk about him in the next few months. I did want to go back before we talk about Beckham. What do you think about last season? Because I've seen a lot of people say, well, did the club not see what happened against Manchester City at the Etihad last season? I just want to point out, I'm actually much more angry about our league performance than our Champions League performance. I don't think, like, if let's remember that before that season started, people were like, there's no way we're getting to Champions League semifinals. Like we didn't sign a backup to Benzema again, which was a huge thing back then. We didn't sign a right back, all this stuff. And so like no one even expected Ancelotti to get to the Champions League semifinals. And then he got them there. And then they're angry about the second leg, which, by the way, I think any team was losing that game. That was one of the most difficult matches I remember watching Real Madrid play in. The atmosphere, the fact that City were just transcendent on so many levels. I'm not saying Ancelotti coached a good game. I think we already documented what he did wrong that game. But like I'm more angry about the league campaign, and I think some of that will have to do with the fact that Benzema was just injured and out of form most of the season, and we had other injuries. And again, I'm not saying it was perfect, and it's not an excuse at all. I think I was actually really disappointed about last season, the decisions we made and the way we performed. But I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it. Because to me, like, especially looking at the way this season has shaken out, it was absolutely the right decision to keep Carlo. And I was leaning towards Xabi Alonso last season, and I was wrong about that. Not wrong about Xabi, but wrong about not wanting Ancelotti back.
Yeah, I think last season we talked about it a lot, and now we're seeing it come true. Is that Barcelona? You look at all their underlying metrics, and Ter Stegen was playing out of his mind.
Yeah,
Teams weren't scoring against them when they should have. And sure enough, this season the ball's not bouncing in their favor, and that's why they're in fourth place. And so I think that's a huge part of it. And yes, you can say, oh well, we were leading before the World Cup break, but again, we were competing on 6 competitions because you have the Club World Cup, you had the World Cup in the middle of the year. You have, I think Ancelotti and Pintus didn't realize how much the dip in the World Cup would impact them in January and February. And I think maybe hopefully he learns from that this year, and that you got to use the guys like Ceballos and some of the rotational pieces during those months because they're fresher. And I think, like, you think to the first half of that season, we were killing it. And then the World Cup came and everything kind of spiraled after that. And we lost too many points in January, February. The Champions League semifinals with Manchester City, they were a dominant team. They could do that to any team. We knew that they had the depth versus us. And without Karim Benzema in the type of form he was in, your Ballon d'Or striker, guy that scored 40 some goals for you last year, like it makes it way more difficult. And I think when you have that context, he still goes on to win the Club World Cup, still goes on to win the Copa del Rey. Obviously, we want more than that, but you look at the previous season, he wins the double, the league and Champions League double, which we've only done 3 other times in our 120 plus year history. Like, that's how rare it is. I don't think people recognize how rare that is. And he did it with a squad nobody was expecting him to do that with. And so it's also equally as hard to get that motivation just as high the next year. Like, we see it with how many teams that to win again the following season. And so, yeah, I think when you have all that context, it makes sense that, hey, yeah, there's enough here, especially over the 2 seasons where he's literally won everything, for him to get a 3rd season.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to note here, a very, very key piece, is that he has the locker room. Everyone in the locker room wants him there. And no matter what you think of him, no matter how much you get frustrated with him or not, it's invaluable to have the locker room bought into you. Like, everybody loves him. You don't have that guarantee if someone new comes in. Again, and by the way, I'm all in for Xabi Alonso for the future. I also think it's important to point out that Xabi Alonso is just starting his managerial career. Like, he's in year 2 of professional coaching.
Yeah, and I'd like to see how Xabi reacts to a dip too, because he inevitably will have his team will have a dip and stuff like that. Like, it'll eventually come, and I'd like to see how he reacts to that and how he handles that.
What, as an aside, what Xabi Alonso is doing right now is unbelievable. I was looking at the
well, I think too, Kiyan, people forget that he promoted Real Sociedad B to Segunda.
Crazy.
Like, that's crazy too.
Yeah. I was looking at, just for a separate article I'm writing about some of the best players in Europe this season, and I was looking at the Big 5 table, and Bayer Leverkusen are, like, if you stack all the Big 5 points together, Bayer Leverkusen would just be first. Like, they're just such a well-oiled machine right now. And it's the interesting thing about it is, although he has really good players, he also has some of a bit of a mishmash of players of players who didn't succeed elsewhere, and he's got them in this system that just works. And it's not like a team full of superstars. Great players, don't get me wrong. Wirtz is amazing. Boniface is amazing. But the fact that he's got this group of players playing this way is pretty impressive. But my point was, again, Xabi Alonso is just starting his managerial career. You could get him in potentially 3, 4, 5 years. And it's not impossible, by the way, because I saw Bayer Leverkusen fans celebrating that Ancelotti got renewed. It's not impossible still that I'm not saying this will happen, but it is in the realm of possibility that something goes south with Real Madrid and Ancelotti potentially walks away, and you still go after Xabi Alonso all in. But I'm just saying, at least, and the other thing we didn't mention is you have a security now. You have a security that, worst case scenario, if you really wanted to part ways with him, you buy out the contract. But while that happens, you have the insurance that Ancelotti doesn't sign a contract with Brazil, because you have him tied down now. The insurance is there. That's the other important factor. Um, don't you think it's crazy though, Matt? Like, think about so many what ifs in this journey. Still go back, man, to 2022. What if Courtois didn't save Messi's penalty? What if we were eliminated against PSG by these fine margins? Where would he be? Would he have been gone then instead of still here? I always think about little moments like that.
Well, yeah, it's crazy to me because I was looking back at my old tweets on Ancelotti this morning just to kind of like see my thought process, especially early on. And I thought he was just going to be like 1 or 2 seasons max, like really just one season to kind of hold
Same.
us over. And look where we are.
Well, me almost so with us at the time. Remember, we did a podcast when we first got him from Everton. We were like, well, man, the last few years of Ancelotti at Everton, Napoli, not great. Bayern, he lost the dressing room. Like, are we sure this is the right call? I know we all love him for what he did for La Decima, but and none of us felt like he should have been fired in 2015. He didn't deserve that. But like, are we sure? This is like the track record in the past few years has been brutal. All right,
Yeah, it's crazy.
David Beckham. So, if you guys want our thoughts on episodes 1 and 2, which were not too Real Madrid focused, but Matt and I found a way to twist it back but also just talk about David Beckham in general. That's already recorded and posted. If you just search Managing Madrid, uh, Beckham, you'll find it. I want to start here with episodes 3 and 4. I thought it was really interesting that they basically publicly acknowledged that had no idea where he was going to play when they signed him. They were like, "Well, Figo's here, so we're not sure how this is going to work." And Figo himself was like, "Well, I'm the right winger, so figure it out. That's not my problem." Was that like interesting to you that they kind of just knew that this could have been a bad idea, but they did it anyway because it was a marketing ploy?
Yeah, I mean, even now you look at what Real Madrid does, they'll take advantage of market opportunities regardless. And like just Beckham the franchise merging with Real Madrid the franchise was just like a match made in heaven. And so
Yeah.
I think they felt like, okay, whatever we got to do, we'll just make this work. And I think that was kind of the perception. And I remember reading, so John Carlin, who I interviewed for Managing Madrid, and he was interviewed in this documentary, the author of White Angels, and he obviously did a book on Beckham. Um, he he talked about how in the negotiations with Manchester United, like Jose Angel Sanchez calls Florentino in the middle of the negotiations when they take a break, and he's like, they only want 25, or it was maybe like 30 million, and he's like, and Florentino says, well, what do you think he's worth? And Jose Angel said 30 times, like 10 300 million. He thinks he's worth 300 million. And Florentino said, great, get him for less, meaning like get him for less than even 30 million. And so ultimately they did. I think it was 25 million all in. But like it shows you the value and like what they thought they were getting. And it was just a market opportunity that they had to take advantage of. But what I think was even really interesting was because we all knew about the Barcelona stuff even before Beckham arrived. And what I liked that the documentary cleared up was that was nothing on Beckham's side. Like Beckham did not want to go to Barcelona. That was between
Yeah.
Manchester United and Laporta, and they agreed a deal. And Beckham found out about it and was super pissed off. And he's like, if I'm going anywhere, I'm going to Real Madrid. There was only one club he wanted to go to, and I think that made me proud as a Madridista and really happy that that was kind of cleared up. And because we all knew about like how close Beckham was to going to Barcelona, but it turns out he didn't want to go there. It was just that Manchester United had agreed to sell him there.
Were you I don't know how much you would personally care about this aspect of it, the Manchester United aspect of it, but were you in some way disappointed with how Sir Alex Ferguson and Manchester United handled the whole Beckham thing? I mean, like I really think it's crazy to think back on it and the fact that Manchester United didn't talk to him while trying to sell him, and Barcelona didn't even bother to talk to the player to see like what's on his mind. Does he want to come here? Does he like our vision? They just like just two clubs ignoring the existence of a human being
Yeah.
that they're negotiating for, and he had no idea. That was just crazy to me.
Yeah. And I think especially like when you look Beckham's loyalty to Manchester United and his love for Manchester United, like at the end of the day, as much as he respects and admires Real Madrid, like Beckham's a Manchester United fan.
Yeah.
Because that's the team his father grew up supporting. That's what he grew up supporting. Like that's he didn't want to leave. If he had to leave, it was Madrid. And so like it's kind of crazy. Like it just shows you how quickly. I mean, this is anything in life. If you work for a corporation or anything, like how quickly you can just be let go and forgotten of, and like all the years of loyalty and work and everything, relationships you built, just gone like that. And I think it was, yeah, I mean, it has to, you, especially just the deterioration. I know we talked about it in previous pods, but the deterioration of his and Ferguson's relationship, because they were like a father son figure to each other. And it's just crazy how it all kind of fell apart and so quickly too. By the end of that season, it just spiraled.
It's still one of the biggest what ifs to me of the last 25 years because it would have completely changed the landscape if Beckham had gone to Barcelona.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have gotten Ronaldinho, and Real Madrid wouldn't have fell into this tactical limbo for a few years. Like none you and I are on the same page on this. It wasn't Beckham's fault. Beckham in a vacuum was a very good player for Real Madrid. It wasn't until Capello came, and ironically, Capello banished him because of the whole MLS deal. And then, but in the second half of the season, but like the tactical fit was hard for him because of Figo and because of the loss of Makaleli, and then the fact that he had to be the sacrificial lamb. It was him that had to play out of position, not Figo. So would this have happened now? If let's say if I was thinking about this a lot. If David Beckham was a market opportunity right now, he played today, and our squad was already littered with players and we already had a star in his position, would we have signed him or not? And I was trying to think like maybe we would have, only in part because I look at like for example Bellingham. We were loaded in midfield. And we signed him anyway, kind of banking on A, that we need a transition for the future. And B, this guy's ridiculous. We can't pass up on him. I don't know. Do you think we would have signed Beckham if it was today?
I do. I think just the commercial opportunity is too large that Real Madrid wouldn't pass it up. So I think
Mm.
they would. I think the question would probably be, would they sell Figo, or how would they handle it today? Um, I don't know. Like, given what we know about Florentino's vision, and even in the documentary, I think Beckham says like Florentino took him into his office and said, um, the Galacticos are Figo, Zidane, Ronaldo, and now you.
Yeah.
And like, and so then that just gave him goosebumps. And so like that was Florentino's vision. So I don't think he wants to give up Figo, especially how difficult those negotiations were. We saw the documentary on that. Um, so I yeah, I think the question, I think he probably always would have ended up as a center midfielder, at least those first few years.
I was thinking of tactical solutions that, again, weren't realistic at the time because we knew that Florentino wanted every single one of those stars to be on the field. The coaches didn't have a say. Luxemburgo has talked about this in the past that he one time he benched Ronaldo and Florentino came down to the dressing room at halftime and was like, "Why did you do that? Don't ever do that again." So like the coaches were handcuffed. Del Bosque was handcuffed and everyone after him, like Quieroz was handcuffed. All these guys were handcuffed. Um, but I was trying to think like if it were to work tactically, what would you do? I think the best solution would have been you have to either bench Figo or Raul, I think. If you bench
Yeah.
Figo, you can just put Beckham in his best position, and Figo was past his prime then anyway. Or you could have moved Figo to the left wing because he could play there and put Beckham on the right wing and then sacrifice one of Raul or Ronaldo. And I chose Raul only because he had started his decline that year
Yeah.
that Beckham came. And then you'd have to move Helguera into midfield permanently, sign a defender. and definitely not sell Cambiaso like you did later on. It's the only way.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think the partner in midfield too, like, or let's say he did ultimately continue to play center midfield. Like in today's game, I think Beckham, in by the end of the career, by the end of his career, he was playing there, is like perfect for a right pivot, defensive midfield pivot. Because he almost, when he played in the right wing, it's not like Beckham's not the guy that was dribbling past people. He would just
Right.
kind of sit outside the, but he'd almost be like what Fede does now, is sit outside the box, like kind of in a right back position, but higher up the field. And then as soon as the ball comes out to him, he's whipping in just an unbelievable
Yeah.
cross or an unbelievable long ball. And just his passing was on par, even better than Xabi Alonso and Tony Cruz. Like they're amongst the best passers in the world.
Yeah.
So I feel like that double pivot position actually fits him.
Yeah.
And he works so hard. Like that was the thing about Beckham, is like he
Yeah.
works relentlessly hard.
Yeah.
And um, so I think he could fit there. It's just like you needed a Makalele. Like you shouldn't have sold a Makalele. You needed that type of player next to him too.
True.
A
Yeah.
true double pivot.
It was Guti for a while. Like,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah. We watched those games.
I that's interesting. I never thought about it, and you didn't say this, but it made me think. How would he do as a single pivot in terms like from a ball progression standpoint? He'd be great. Maybe you could do something where you in the build-up phase you put Beckham back there in between the center backs and get him to play quarterback. But then on defense, he wouldn't be the anchor. He would shift
Yeah.
into a different position.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be
I don't think
interesting.
defensively, like, especially in that position, tactically, like he had what it takes to play there, but
Yeah.
definitely quarterbacking, kind of like Cruz does now. He could 100% do.
Lucas asked me this last week. I don't even remember how it came up. But he asked like, what do you think Carlo would have done? Oh, it wasn't specifically about Beckham. It was just about reinventions. And he said, what do you think Carlo would have done if he coached the team in 2004? Like, would he reinvent a player? Like, what do you think he would do with Beckham?
Um, so Carlo did manage Beckham twice at AC Milan
That's
during his
right.
loan spell, and then PSG. He actually Carlo is the one that was Beckham's manager on his last game.
Hmm.
Um, and I think obviously at AC Milan he played on the right, and at PSG he played as like a defensive mid, right pivot, kind of like we were talking about. Um, I think, yeah, I think Carlo probably would have reinvented. I just think given the player personnel and who had to be on the pitch, I think it was always going to happen that Beckham was going to turn into like a defensive midfielder.
So, I have some bones to pick with the documentary. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was made really well. I loved all of the interviews, basically, from Beckham to Neville to Rio to Florentino to
Salgado.
Salgado was great. I was disappointed with how little they even acknowledged the existence of Raul in the whole documentary. There was a part, I don't know if this was the John Carlin part or someone else was narrating this point, but they listed off all of Real Madrid's best players. They said Figo, Zidane, Ronaldo, Roberto Carlos. They didn't mention Raul. There's barely the only time he appears in the documentary is that uh he's just in the kickoff like clip in one of the games where him and Beckham are at the kickoff line, right? Kick the game off. There was no mention of the first leg of the 2003 tie, only the second leg. So they talked about Ronaldo Nazario's greatness at Old Trafford.
Yeah.
Raul was like the star of the first leg.
Yeah.
It just kind of bothered me. I don't know. It was I was just disappointed because they didn't like
Yeah.
they even mentioned Roberto Carlos, who was like Raul
Well,
was
Roberto Carlos got an interview.
Galacticos.
I feel like because Raul, they asked to do an interview with him, and maybe he didn't want to, so maybe they didn't include him in. Because
Maybe
Roberto Carlos and Ronaldo got interviewed, and they were hilarious.
Roberto Carlos was
Um,
awesome. Yeah,
yeah. Um, but yeah, I see your point. I think like even was Iker Casillas like even I don't think he was, or no, he was interviewed, wasn't he? I can't
I can't
remember.
remember. I can't remember.
Um, but yeah, I think that's a fair point. Um, What did you? Yeah, I want to hear kind of more of like what were some of your takeaways, especially because these Real Madrid portions, like especially, obviously I remember all this because I was like just tracking his life every day as a kid, but maybe I don't know if you were as closely like with his personal life and the affair and how Victoria, she claimed she didn't like Spain or she liked Spain, but you could tell from the documentary she was so much happier when they moved to LA and like just
Yeah.
really didn't he didn't want to be in Spain. Like she had bad
Well,
memories there and
I came out of this documentary. I mean I didn't know much about Posh Spice, before this doc. Um, although I did have a crush on her as I confessed in episode 1 when I was like 10. Spice Girls was always on in my house. I watched the Spice World movie. That was a great one. Time. I didn't know much about her. I came away from this documentary thinking like I was really impressed with her. I don't know. I felt I liked the way she carried herself. I liked the dynamic she had with David. I liked she it seemed like a very wholesome relationship. I hated the fact how they were vilified by the media and fans just because they were rich and famous and attractive. And it just felt like I mentioned this on a Churros y Tacticas podcast we did a couple weeks ago that like there's so much of society that just thinks it's okay to dump things on famous people just because they're famous and they can just take it because they're lucky, they're rich, they're famous, and they didn't deserve any of the hate they got and all and the lack of privacy and that came with it. Um, I did want to ask. I had a couple questions for you. I thought of you in this particular moment where Carlos Quieroz was talking about he correlated a decline in Beckham with a that gladiator commercial.
yeah,
He said that
he gained muscle.
the the upper body mass was bad. That the upper body mass he had to gain for that commercial was bad for his performances. I don't know if you had any thought I thought that was really interesting that he said that, and he actually like that was something that they analyzed. And
Yeah.
I was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, I feel like that was advanced for those times too, because
Yeah,
those early 2000s. Yeah, I found that really interesting. And obviously, not only you mentioned Beckham gets signed, and there's already one of the best players in the world in his position, but they also bring in the coach that tried to get rid of him at Manchester United.
right.
So it was like the perfect combination. Ultimately, obviously, he won Kurosh over again, and um, it ended up being a fine relationship. But yeah, I did find that really interesting. And like he was part of the reason, Carlos Quieroz was part of the reason why Beckham was like starting to get phased out at Manchester United.
That's another thing that wouldn't happen today. I feel like at Real Madrid, like they
Yeah.
wouldn't go sign Beckham and then sign the coach that
That tried
didn't
to
like
oust him.
him.
Yeah.
It made no sense. Like you look at these decisions and you like, wow, we've come a long way with our decision making. When you see stuff like that, um, there was another thing that struck me. Uh, where was it? Uh,
Well, the thing too about that season, and we've done podcasts on it, but that first season, like the team was unreal. That's the first 6 months of the year. Like they were top
yeah,
of La
it was
Liga,
fun.
top of the Champions League
Yeah,
group, top of like everything. They were on track for the treble until about March, and then it literally
yeah,
all fell apart. It was
yeah,
crazy. It was one of the biggest, like, just biggest shutdowns, and everything happened. Like they lost 5 games in a row, was it in La Liga? Like, which was I don't think we've ever done that. And they just completely fell apart. But like in the first 6 months of the year, everyone was like, "Oh my God, Florentino and the Galactico project, he's a genius." Like nobody thought it would actually work. There'd be no balance, but it's working, and he's a genius. And then by the end of the season, it just all fell apart.
yeah. Um, I was thinking back to like so in episode 3 when they're talking about how uh they revisited the second leg at Old Trafford between Real Madrid and Manchester United, and Beckham's telling the story about how Zidane asked him if he's going to Real Madrid and how that was such a
Yeah.
surreal moment for him. Do you think that Manchester United had a chance to come back had he started that game?
I don't know. I think that was such a special night for Real Madrid, and like
It it was one of the best games I've ever seen in my life, but our defense was so bad. And like I don't know, like maybe just the oomph that Beckham would have gave. Obviously, he scored like immediately when he came in. I don't know. I don't think they would have, but I think it would have been more nervy. I don't
yeah,
know. It's worth
yeah.
noting.
But it's again like Zidane, and just how many times has he quietly been a part of just like enhancing the essence of Real Madrid and signing players and like a little whisper or like this is what you have to do, like come to Real, like it just he's involved in even Jude Bellingham, like like even now, there's so much of like Zidane kind of sprinkled into these little stories you hear about on transfers and convincing players, and it's just his transfer has, I know we've talked about it, paid us a million times over in just what he's done for the club.
So I mentioned that the star of the first leg was Raul, and the star of the second leg was Ronaldo. Zidane in those two legs was unreal. Like,
Guti in the double pivot at Old Trafford too was
oh my
amazing.
God, Guti dominated that game. Like, but Zidane, like one of the if like those two legs in particular, I think
Yeah,
may have been like two of the greatest like two legs that a midfielder has ever put together in the Champions League.
yeah,
Zidane was unbelievable. Like the highlight package from both those games is truly a work of art. Like it's pure art in its greatest football form. Zidane in those two legs was incredible to watch. One of my favorite build-up goals, maybe my favorite build-up goal of all time, was Ronaldo's second goal at Old Trafford, where Zidane and Figo and Guti are just playing it around, and Roberto Carlos makes that run and squares it
yeah,
to an open Ronaldo. Special stuff.
yeah.
Um, so I know we're running out of time. What is there anything that you wanted to discuss about the doc that we didn't hit?
Um, I think obviously the fourth episode kind of gets to the end of his Real Madrid career. And honestly, that Capello season was wild for so many reasons, and I think it's a lot of Real Madrid fans like favorite league season ever just because of how epic it was.
Yeah,
Um, but he was scapegoated and ousted and kind of made to train on his own after not starting. Capello kind of wanted to do a transition, didn't want to include Beckham in the starting
that
11.
was unnecessary, man.
Then yeah, unnecessary. And then he signs the LA contract. They kind of ostracize him, and he comes back. And I'll remember it because the first game, Real Sociedad away, he scores that free kick, and that is like when it all started. That's when the comeback started. Beckham played incredible that second half of the season.
Yeah,
I remember Real Madrid were like panicking, trying to figure out a way to get him out of his LA contract and get him to extend. And I think he wanted to, like, I know in the documentary he said, "Hey, I gave LA my word, and like I wasn't gonna extend." And
I
like
think
I
Victoria had some pull there too.
yeah, but I think if he could have it his way, like he would have probably extended. Because I remember kind of the feeling in some of the interviews he did back then. Um, but yeah, I think it was the perfect send off though, the right way to end his career um, at the club, and he spent what 4 seasons, 4 seasons total, um, and to finally get that La Liga title because the Galacticos went 3 years, like literally upon his arrival, 3 years without a trophy. And so finally to get that, and that's literally when I started following. So my first 3 seasons were no trophies, and to finally get that La Liga title and the way they won it, it was just so epic. And him obviously with his kids on the field afterwards, and it was just really nice. A good ending.
How do you think he would have fit if he had stayed one more year? Um,
With Schuster coming in too.
Schuster came in, and that was the year we brought in Pepe, Robben, Schneider,
Schneider, yeah.
Drenthe,
I don't
Heinze,
know. Do you
Saviola.
think? I don't know if we still would have brought in Schneider because I felt like Schneider almost replaced Beckham, and Schneider played a lot of times like on the right, cutting in on his left foot, and took all the free kicks and stuff like that. Um, so I don't know. I feel like the question comes, we would have still signed Wesley Schneider?
Well, I would have to look at it exactly, but I feel like Robben was injured so much that
Yeah,
he probably would have just taken all the minutes at right wing anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. There was a moment in the documentary where he was barefoot in a Real Madrid TV interview.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That
I don't know
was
why. Joe,
yeah, I don't know why. Yeah, I remember that.
uh, I had to get her on the pod, but I've been texting Kay Murray about this because she has a lot of Beckham stories from her time at Real Madrid TV,
Yeah.
and she said she'd come on the podcast to talk about it, but it's been hard to coordinate. I
Yeah.
think I think I think it'll be fun to have her on to tell some stories, but
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, man, great documentary from start to finish. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think they did a great job of marketing to
Oh,
everybody.
let me ask you this real quick, because
Hmm.
this was something I told you what Issa, my wife's takeaway was like when the Real Madrid portion came out. Did you feel that as well?
Yeah,
Like I felt like the
it's a
documentary did a
different
good
beast.
job of like, oh, Real Madrid's like, oh, another level up from Manchester United even. Like this is huge. Like you kind of feel the weight of the club.
100%. I mean, that the amount of cameras, the amount of media, the presentation, how kind of weird it was. Like, I don't know, like it was like it almost felt like he was overwhelmed by the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he didn't really know like what to say. There was like translators. Posh was talking about how, you know, how crazy it was and a little bit uncomfortable it was. It's a different beast, man. It's a different
Yeah.
beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. Uh, all right. We're gonna wrap it here. Just some quick things. Happy New Year, first of all. Second of all, I am doing my New Year's annual mailbag, which I started last season and going to continue this season and beyond. It was a lot of fun last year, New Year's. I just wanted to get a podcast out, and I think a lot of people were just kind of home and wanting to listen to something. So you guys can ask me any question you want. I will go through and answer them. You can get your questions in on Discord, YouTube, Patreon. Those are the three best places right now. That'll be released on the 30th or the 31st. And I wanted to do some shout outs. Matt, you have time for shout outs? All right. So, as you guys know, our members over on patreon.com/managing Madrid get a ton of bonus content. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Most of our content is actually only for members. The free ones you get are just one or two a week we put out, but they're not nearly the entire catalog. So if you want the entire catalog, you don't want to miss Champions League post game shows, emergency transfer podcasts, or weekly mailbags, weekly live Zoom calls where you can talk to us face to face. Go to patreon.com/managing Madrid and you can join us there. Alternatively, if Patreon doesn't work in your country, you can click the memberships tab on YouTube and join that way. And one of the things we do is if you pledge $10 or more per month, you get access to everything. You get a specific shout out on the podcast and you get guaranteed responses to your questions. So shout out to these $10 plus patrons per month as follows: Daniel Smith, Fabian Moreno, KT, Primo, Ramtin Maghrur, Varun Belachau, Adam Dorsey, Adar Zalukovic, Azaz Hussein, Alex Slyberg, Alexandria McCaskill, Ananya Kumar, Andres Silvestre, Anthony Tharp, Armando L, Arman Gashi, Armash, Arnab Mukherjee, Brandon Stevens, Brendan Powers, Carlos Fuentes, Krishna Casa, Christian Toft, Connor McMorrow, Daniel Williams, Deadpool Lover, Eloy Enriquez, S.A. Davicito, Frederick Sundros, Frederick Antakiro, Gary Kohut, Graham Gerard, Howard Moore, Ian Marley, Jacob P., Jason Fitz, John Fernandez, Jose Cruz, Jose Osorio, Kevin Rivera, Halfan Alkabi, Kunal Tilakar, Leon Stavronakis, Logan Stahl, Magnus Lext, Martin Ridman, Matthew Atkins, Marin Myrtle, Michael Zinberg, MJ Diego, Naveen Babu, Ramesh Babu, Endaba Halabangana, Nelson Mazariego, Nick Ribeiro, Nicholas Moeller, Oscar Barrera, Patrick Diafati, Paulo Fierro, Peter P., Phoenix, Rishi D., Sai Mohan, Sasi Kumar, Samar Z, Samuli Justin, Santos Solorzano, Sergio Arispe, Sheikh Hatiri, Sumanchu Singh, Sujai Wani, Sushank Damala, Tahmid Kalam, Tobias Arroyo Botcher, Wamik Jamal, Wasim Haddad, Will Sousa, Willie Reed, and Brandon Alvarez. You guys are legends. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Matt, thank you.
Thanks, Kiyan.
and Happy New Year.